with us, and they are the co-founders of HBM Advisory. And we're very lucky to have them actually, because between the two of them, they have over 20 years of experience at the Times and the Economist. And they cover kind of the full range of content business with backgrounds in marketing, advertising, and journalism. And, a few things about them. Subscriptions doubled under Alan's tenure as head of digital at the Times. And Michael took the loss-making circulation business at The Economist and turned it into the largest contributor of the group's profit. So no small task there. Not shabby at all. So HBM Advisory helps their clients fully monetize their content businesses. And that's why we've invited them to talk today about how to effectively build digital products and nail your pricing. Very timely and relevant in today's world. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So Michael and Alan, welcome to What's Your Bias?
Thank you very much. Pleasure
Nice
to be here.
You. Yeah. So I'm going to dive right in. I'm not going to waste any time because I do want to save some time for questions at the end if we can. And if you are a company building new digital products, where do you start? I think, Alan, I'm going to come to you.
Sure, I'll kick off on this. So I think it's kind of obvious, but often neglected, is that you should really focus in a laser-like way on the needs of your users, and indeed the unmet needs of your users. Because, I think one thing we've experienced far too often is people come up with a great idea and rush to get it to market without pausing and seeing if it's something that people actually want. And there's a number of ways of kind of checking on user needs. I mean, we always, I think a really good place to start is the data, because the data is your users. And I know in some industries that's not quite as accepted as in others. But if you look at the biggest companies in the world, they're all data companies: Netflix, Amazon. Well, Netflix is not the biggest company in the world, but Amazon and Apple and so on. Apple less so, but they're pretty much all data companies in one way or another. So you start with the data, but then I think it's also really important to talk to people, to really find out, to dig into what they need and what they don't need. And often this can lead you in unexpected directions. So an example is when I was working at the Times of London, we relaunched our smartphone app and our website app. And after talking to people, we realized that the way they viewed what we were giving them as a service was completely different from what we as journalists did. And actually, we ended up doing something really counterintuitive that was very difficult for senior people in the organization to get their heads around, because it was publishing less often rather than more often. And I had kind of, board members saying to me, but when you're working in a kind of online, you can publish a lot quicker than when you're producing a print newspaper. And I was like, yes, but people don't necessarily want us to produce quickly. And that was all born out of talking to readers and spending time and learning what it was they really valued from us. So I think the number one thing, as far as I'm concerned, is always talk to your users as much as you possibly can, and try and kind of draw out from them what they're not getting from either your product or from other products. And I think trying to give them that is what really works.
I think it can also be a really fertile place to inspire new products as well. So to give one example, when I was looking after The Economist, we knew that people read The Economist because one of the loneliest places to be is on the edge of a conversation. So they to be fully briefed reading The Economist, felt that they could pretty much attend any meeting or even a social event or a work event or a conference. They'd be briefed and they would know what people were talking about. And we thought we'd take that a step further and launched a little app that gave you a sort of intense shot of The Economist first thing in the morning, which is why we called it The Economist Espresso. Which the top 5 articles top 5 things you needed to know that day, which we restricted to 140 words each, to take 140 characters, inspiration from Twitter, of course. But we did that, and it was incredibly successful. We were charging people 90 a year for that app, and we very quickly got over 30,000 subscribers just through meeting an unmet need. But we didn't set out to do that. It just came, and it was inspired from doing that user research and thinking, actually, here's something that we could go a bit further on than even the Economist does. So I fully chime with Alan. It's all about understanding what people want and thinking then about how you can deliver against that unmet need, but constantly checking in with them as well. So when you have got a concept and you do think it's going to deliver against their unmet needs, you've got to keep going back to customers. And we do hear, especially because we work a lot in publishing, we do hear a lot from some sort of people saying, well, they'll quote Henry Ford. If you ask customers what they want, they would say faster horses. And yeah, we hear that, but actually we completely refute that, and we push back on that very firmly, so that it has to come from your customers, it has to come from your users. You have to provide the inspiration and the creativity, but they're the ones who'll tell you whether it's the right solution or not.
I think picking up on that Henry Ford thing, what he wasn't doing was really listening to the customers, and what they were really saying is they wanted to get from A to B faster. They probably didn't care what the product was that allowed the mode of transport that allowed them to do that. They wanted to get from A to B faster. And I think it's kind of talks to the thing that if you listen to them, you'll lose the fear of cannibalizing what you already do, which was probably kind of what people in the horse and carriage business were really worried about when the car came along, was cannibalizing, and so they held on to it for as long as they possibly could. And I think you've got to say, if I don't cannibalize myself, someone else will. So I think that's definitely another thing to consider.
Yeah.
Good advice. I want to go back to something, Alan, that you touched on initially, which was we had leadership telling us, what do you think that you're doing? And obviously nothing gets done unless you have leadership buy-in. So how do you go about that? And what happens if your leadership is really resistant? How do you get them on side?
Mm-hmm. So I think, a kind of technique we use at HBM Advisory and have used in the past is to absolutely kind of devote a lot of time to talking to the top leadership. And I think it's really important to kind of hear their view in the company, to hear their views. As much as you're hearing what the users are saying, you need to hear what the leadership sees as their future, because they are emotionally invested in their products, understandably, and will often kind of feel defensive about any criticism about what has gone before, which when you're developing something new is always kind of inherently there. You're saying, well, what we're doing now doesn't quite work. We want to do something that's better. And I think you have to be really aware of the kind of the human side of the leadership of companies, which sometimes, if they're your boss, is not the easiest thing in the world to do. But I think it's really important to kind of spend time, talk to them, kind of be respectful of what they think, but also over communicate as well. Really explain over and over again. So, I've done projects where I did the same presentation 2 or 3 times to the same person, just to make sure that they kind of finally got what we were talking about, and knowing when to withdraw when the time is not quite right to pitch this great new idea is equally as important as having the great idea in the first place. So I think that is where the internal skills, internal soft skills are really, really important.
We have the advantage, of course, that we're independent now. So we work our way around the C-suite of a client, and we ask them all the same questions, so that we say to them, we're going to ask you all the same questions. It'll help us understand where there are commonalities, but also where your views diverge. And that's sometimes as useful for us in helping them develop a successful being listened to as well. It's harder when you're within to get the funding, because there are fiefdoms and there are empires and there are people with vested interests, and some people don't want change, and some people do want change but want it to report to them, and you have to navigate all of that kind of stuff. But we go around and speak to every single stakeholder, interview them in depth, and they then know that they have a voice, and that their voice has been heard in that process. And even if you're developing a product within a department, within an organization, speak to the other departmental leads about it and get their, so at least they understand that they've been listened to, and try and get their buy-in.
Good.
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest mistakes you see when working with companies building digital products?
So I think the number one thing is trying to do too much with the product. Too much complexity. And I think complexity is always the enemy of progress. So I would always advise to keep things as simple as possible, so that it's really easy to understand what your offer is and what the product is doing. So I know they do a lot more, but if you look at the Google search homepage, it's very simple. You're just doing one thing. You're searching the internet for information, which is their core business. Alongside advertising, of course, but that's the core of the product. It's like, you look at Airbnb, it's very, very simple to know what they're offering you, and likewise, practically all the very, very successful digital kind of giants, as we call them now, they do one thing in particular very, very well. And I think a lot of times people get excited about a new product. Oh, we could do this and we could do that and we could do that, and they over complicate matters. And actually, if you talk to users, what they really want is simplicity. They don't like complexity. People don't like complexity. They want things to be easy to understand, kind of in front of them. And so, I think this is a key thing. People, I think, people talk about wanting to have their cake and eating it. And, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson talked about being a cakeist because he wanted to do that, to have everything. And you can't have everything. You need to really nail down about what the key value is of the product and relentlessly focus on that. At some point later, you can branch out from that and add new things. But what is the key thing that you're doing that people value and will pay for from you and you alone?
And there's always the opportunity. There's always the opportunity for upsell later, as well. So you can add those features if you want to at a later point. The other thing I think people make a really big mistake, because I look after kind of the business plan side of the development of new products, and Alan really focuses on the content. And one of the things that people make a really big mistake about is that a product is never a single project and finished. It's never finished. Digital products iterate. And so when I look at people's business plans, there's an amount of investment, and the assumption is it's job done, and it really isn't. And so you've got to make sure that your commercial strategy can accommodate the ongoing costs of knowing that product, once it's out there, a digital product is never done. You always want to improve it. You always want to, keep people buying it, especially if it's got a subscription element to it, which many digital products do. So by nature, it's never going to be the product that you launched. In a few years' time, it won't be the same product. It'll have evolved, it'll have iterated. And so everything you have to accommodate from your pricing, your revenue projections, and the marketing, the sales, everything that goes into that business plan has to assume that it's not just a project and done. And a lot of digital people will know that, but a lot of C-suite will not. And they say, okay, I'll give you the investment for the new thing, but I don't expect there to be any other costs.
So unrealistic.
But it is unrealistic. But in the digital world, you have to accommodate that in your business plan.
And if you don't mind me jumping in, I know I said I'll remain quiet, but Michael, I just wanted to touch on something there. I think some of the people maybe listening to this would be wondering, how then do you go back and have that hard conversation with the C-suite to explain, look, this is a now investment, this isn't the full investment?
Well, I mean, if you're building a business plan that shows revenue growth over time, you have the opportunity to show how the costs evolve over time as well. And you can capitalize the build costs, so you can spread the payments of the build cost, but you can't really capitalize the ongoing costs. You've got to build that into the P&L, and it's sometimes a bit of a shock. And it kind of leads into pricing consideration as well, which you've got to think about, which I'm sure we'll touch on. But you've got to think about, am I charging enough to cover this cost on an ongoing basis as well? And thinking then about that value, is that cost really going to be justified because it meets that unmet need? So I think people see it's a bit of a shock, but then when you explain it to them, they realize that it's never going to be finished. And you have to build in those costs on an ongoing basis.
Fair enough. Before I move on to pricing, that was my next question, Michael.
Oh, okay.
Alan, I know when we kind of chatted before, you talked about finding the gaps between what the customer is really saying. Can you expand on that for me?
Yeah, so I think it's really it slightly comes back to the kind of faster horse and trying to divine what people are really saying, or what the gap is that they're kind of the unmet need. I guess a famous example is Steve Jobs and the kind of the iPhone and the iPad, is that he kind of really invented these out of, well, the iPad in particular, invented out of nowhere, because he saw this was kind of an unmet need for customers, that they would value this, a screen into the world. And I think you should having the imagination to come up with looking into those gaps is really, really important. Of course, you have to kind of, unlike Apple did with that, you have to really test it and really work out that it is something that people want. But it's looking into the gaps between what people say and saying, okay, well, you say you want this, but is actually your unmet need something else? And that's quite a tricky thing to do. But it requires a lot of empathy, and it requires actually longer interviews with customers.
Really knowing your customers.
Where you spend time with them, and where you kind of see how your products fit into their day, which I think is a really important way of looking at things. And look, I know a lot of the tech giants do this all the time. And they think of the kind of the daily cycle of their customers and what their touch points are within that day, and what it is that people kind of really want for that moment.
Very good. So pricing, it's very easy to get wrong. We see it a lot. How do you get it right? Michael, I'm going to come to you on this one.
Research, and more research. So basically,
simple then. Done.
Yeah, there are simple. It's first of all, you've got to understand what the costs are going to be. You'd never do a pricing strategy cost up. So you don't say, well, my costs are this, therefore I'm going to add a percentage on top to do it. The price is, how well does this product deliver against the unmet need of the customer, and how much will they value it, and you price it based on that. But at the same time, you do need to know what your costs are, because if your costs are going to not provide the margin that you need, especially with all those ongoing costs that I talked about a minute ago, then your pricing strategy is going to be wrong. But you do look at the marketplace. It can vary from industry to industry and from region to region. And B2B pricing versus consumer pricing is very, very different, of course. But definitely do the research in the marketplace. What are other people who are perhaps not delivering quite as well as your product does, but perhaps in the same arena? What are they charging? That gives you a sense of what people are willing to pay. But then really talk to people as well. If you had something that did this, would you be prepared to pay for it? And thinking about, what kind of things do you pay for that are as valuable? And it could be anything from, I look at a shopping basket of things, from anything from a cinema ticket to this is for consumers, cinema ticket, to a novel, to a magazine, to other things that people might subscribe to apps, to things that provide utility digitally, or for content providers, and say to them, what is it about those things that make you willing to pay those prices? One mistake I see people make is a cost up pricing. So they start with the costs, and they decide, well, I'm going to make it a factor of 1.5 of my cost or something. But actually you might be overpricing, but also you might be missing a really big opportunity, which is people will pay for things that they find valuable. And I've gone around over the last 20 years putting prices up everywhere I've been of the products that I've been selling, because you can, if people find it valuable. And I'm no longer at The Economist, but subscribers to The Economist will not be delighted to know how much I put the prices up over the years. But the subscription volume still grew considerably. The other thing to think about in pricing is the number of different options that you give to people. Alan touched on this at the beginning. Don't put too much into the product, but definitely don't put too much into the page that someone arrives at when they're going to make a decision about pricing. So we get asked a lot, what's the, is there like a basic, a sort of advanced and a premium version of this product, and what should be the things that we just put into, and the tendency is on those pricing pages to throw everything at it, to have a great long bullet. So these are all the things that it can do. But people just don't have time to look at it, and they don't absorb it. There's lots of case studies out there on kind of the number of different options that you give to people, but just assume you have no time at all. People want to go, so what is it that it does for me? Will I find value in that? There is always a weird group of people who just go for the most expensive one because they just want the best. That always happens. So have an expensive option, but also price based on what you want people to buy. So if there is a version of a product that costs you more, make sure you're charging more, or bring up the price of the cheaper version to the same level so that your cost is covered, and price based on what you want your profits to be, and you've got to have the confidence that it meets that unmet need, of course. But don't make it too complex. Don't do it cost up. Make sure your business plan is fully loaded with all the ongoing costs, and make sure your pricing delivers the right sort of margin.
Okay, so if you're laying out your strategy, what are the key areas to include and be clear on before you even get started? I think that you talked to me before, there's like 5 or 6 really key points.
Yeah. Well, I can talk through some of those, or do you want to do that, Alan?
Well, actually, we can alternate them.
Let's alternate,
because they're basically parts of, our kind of, when we engage with clients, they are part of our HBM Advisory method, where we talk them through these kind of key steps. And the first one is as I was saying earlier, understanding your user needs. That is the number one thing, and the place to start every single time. Should we alternate, Michael?
And the next thing on the list is your market analysis, to really see who else is, what else are people, your target audience, buying. Could be a competitor that's already in market, that you're going to launch a new competitor for, or it could be just really understand what it is that they're buying already in your space, and not just in your space as well. So do that market analysis.
And then making sure that your product strategy is right, and if you are delivering that alongside content of really whatever kind, making sure that they are truly aligned. But making sure you have a product strategy that is fully understood within the business, and is clearly articulated, and also drives towards delivering the maximum value in the shortest possible time to your business. I think that's absolutely crucial. And quite often we see there's lots of competition for attention from different departments and businesses for the product roadmap. And I think that's where you need to have a kind of someone leading product, whether a head of product, director of product, or whomsoever, who's really firm about making sure that everything that's done is delivering value both to customers and to the business.
And then the next thing really is optimizing your customer journey. Really, really focus on that. We meet a lot of clients who've got fantastic products, and they're wondering why the churn isn't as good as it should be, sorry, the retention isn't as good as it should be, and they've got high churn. And then something quite simple is broken in that customer journey. Perhaps you're not onboarding people correctly, so they're not really making use of what they've just paid for. Perhaps, perhaps the path to purchase is too complex, and perhaps you're asking for data that you don't really need, and you could actually ask for after someone's bought. So keep that customer journey really simple, but constantly look at it and make sure that the initial purchase and the renewal of that product are seamless and user friendly.
And then finally, once you've got all that right, and this talks to the kind of the point about simplicity that I mentioned earlier, at that point, then you start to think, okay, right, how can I upsell my customers, and what can I cross-sell them with, or cross-sell them to? And I think it's important to have this at the back of your mind at the beginning of the process, but make sure you kind of you deliberately put it to one side so that your key focus is on selling the core product. So we kind of look at this revenue development as part of our methods, to be honest, towards the end of the process, so that we make so that our clients kind of are aligned and focused on their core product.
Okay, so before I ask my last question, I just want to remind everyone here, we can take a couple questions at the end. If anyone wants to ask Alan or Michael anything, put it in the chat now. But my final question is really, if listeners were going to take away one key thing from this conversation, what would it be? Michael, you first.
Oh, I shouldn't really jump in on Alan's thing, but it is make sure you understand your users inside out. I mean, they're the people who can inform the right product strategy and the right path to success. And if you're not engaging with your users before you launch and after you launch, then you have such a great risk of not developing the right strategy and the right product.
Alan, anything to add on that one?
Well, funny enough, I was going to say something very similar, which was be humble in the face of your customers. However, seeing as Michael said that, and this is perhaps appropriate, given that he took what I was going to say, I think one of the key things is to make sure that your business is really aligned around its goals. Make sure that everyone agrees that the product that in particular developing is doing. Everyone agrees what it's doing and what the outcome is and what the goals are and what the KPIs are, because too often within even very famous institutions, we find that lots of people have completely different views about what a product is, should be, who it's serving, what the KPIs are, and so on. So that alignment is absolutely crucial. And people being people, it's often quite difficult.
Yeah, we sometimes witness incredible public scraps between senior people in our meetings, because which is
the dirt you could dish right now, Michael.
It's extraordinary, because sometimes Alan and I we kind of look at each other like, have they forgotten we're here? Because but there's such a people have us as someone said we're going to launch an XYZ, we're going to do this, and that's what that's what we're putting all our money behind, and then they find that everyone has interpreted that differently. And everyone has got really quite fixed and quite diverging views on what is actually going to happen, what is going to be launched. And then we come to them and say, okay, we've listened to you, or this, this is the path. And we've witnessed some incredible fights between CEOs, COOs. I mean, just extraordinary. Shareholders as well, because they didn't, they're investors. We quite often present. We've done an audit of your strategy, and this is what we think is going to happen. We, the divergence of expectations can be huge, and so just make sure that's all through communication and doing that hard job of sort of corridor walking at the beginning and meeting with absolutely everybody, as we said, and just make sure they all know what it is you're doing.
Perfect. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Before you start.
Before you even start,
Yeah.
you got a lot of groundwork to lay, but this has been fascinating. Thank you so much. I don't have any questions in the chat, I was about to say, but Paul's going to have one because I know he is. So go for it.
Right. So, I mean, wearing my agency hat, a lot of, what we're taught is that we supposedly listen well, and we're, build your playbook, know what questions to ask. And, I think that from listening to you guys today, especially talking about being humble and trying to understand people and speaking to more people than you would usually do. Sometimes agencies are frightened to ask to speak to more stakeholders, and maybe they think that's a little bit out of their remit. But I think that could also be quite a powerful thing to do, because maybe a lot of agencies don't. So when you do it, it's like, whoa. So listening.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, listening, like, if we're not listening well, and we think we've got this playbook that helps us get through our sales process, where do you see, from your experience, how people not listening causes bottlenecks in pricing and product building, if at all?
Well, no, it does. Well, because some if you say, for instance, you're working with a CMO and you've worked in great harmony on what the strategy is going to be and how your agency is going to execute it, and then the CFO says, I didn't think it was going to be like that, I'm not going to give you the money. I mean, and that happens, and it's happened to me. I've worked really closely when I've been a CMO with agencies. We've come up with a plan, and we just didn't sell it in to the other senior stakeholders in the organization. And CEOs have lots of fires to fight, and they might decide, well, I'm going to give the money somewhere else. And so it's nothing even more so with products. So I think at the beginning of a relationship, it's a really, really good idea for the agency to do some corridor walking. There's no, it's not treading on other people's toes. It's really, so I've gone to learn more about your organization, and can I, as an agency, can I speak to not just the CMO, but can I speak to the other senior stakeholders? I'm not trying to sell them anything. I just want to learn about them and learn more about their view of where the organization is heading and what your strategy is, so that I can build a bigger picture.
And just to add to that, it was what you were saying reminded me of a podcast I was listening to this week, which was by Michael Lewis, who wrote Liar's Poker and Moneyball and various other things. It's called Against the Rules. And the latest season is all about hunting out expertise and how expertise can help you get to the root of a problem really, really quickly, and kind of help you deliver outsized results in whatever field. He talks about a lot of areas like weather forecasting, search and rescue at sea, as well as Moneyball in baseball and other sports. And his thing is that the expert in a subject is often in an organization 5 or 6 levels down from the CEO. And quite often, if you just listen to the most senior person, you're not getting the expertise that the person who actually does the work, they just know about. And part of it was, he was talking about how actually a company in the States, Athena Healthcare, but a couple of really smart Harvard graduates spoke to a woman who works in the billing department in a health company, and they basically they downloaded her and wrote it into code and produced more than $1 billion business, because she knew everything about how customers actually act when they're doing healthcare, and all the kind of the exceptions in the system. And so I think if you're going to go and, as an agency, go and talk to people, talk to as many people as possible within the
and at
time
every level,
obviously,
to
get the real expertise out of that business.
I see this a lot in retail, so I'm glad you mentioned it, because the people at the coalface, they know what's going on.
They know,
Cool.
Definitely.
And one more, please, phone, just one more. So, Michael, this is a pricing question, right? Because this is one of my favorite things, and you mentioned cost plus pricing, and you also mentioned to look around to see what people are paying. Now, I know that people often, and you've probably seen this, they make that mistake. They go, right, this is the average cost of like my competitors, so I'm just going to price myself somewhere there in the middle. And why doesn't that work for businesses?
Well, because either it's there's a mismatch between the unmet need you're delivering against, or either, which can go two ways. You're either massively underpricing or you could be overpricing. Mm-hmm. So it's not always about what the competition's charging. It's about understanding when you become empathetic with your customers, you understand what it is they value and therefore don't mind paying for. Never do it. Be very mindful of your cost, but never do your pricing cost plus, and never also only base your pricing on what your competitors are paying, unless you want to do a kind of loss leading introductory price that undercuts your competition and knocks them out. But and obviously there needs to be in your business plan that would probably be unsustainable and wouldn't cover your costs. But maybe you've got the money to cover that from your investment initially in order to grow. It's obviously like the sort of Uber model of undercutting taxi drivers. So that a lot of money to do that, but then suddenly that runs out. You have to put the prices up, and then suddenly,
now we're all furious that we're paying
so much. When I go back to, I may as well use a black cab then. Yes. So that sort of thing taken into consideration, but that could be a strategy. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And for those people that either will watch this on replay or just hanging around to the very end, how do they get in contact with you guys if they needed to?
Come to our website, which is hbmadvisory.com, or we're both on LinkedIn as well. You can message us there.
Perfect. Brilliant. Thank you guys so much. This has been fascinating. And I hope everyone that joined us will come again for our next conversation. So thank you. We'll wrap it up there.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys, for joining us.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.